Thank you everyone for being here. Um, it's really wonderful to be hosting this conversation and reading tonight with all of you and introducing poet Stav Poleg as we celebrate her remarkable new collection, The Banquet. Um, I'm Leo Boix and I'll be hosting tonight's event. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. Friends, readers, and fellow poets gather across screens to share an hour of poetry, some thoughts, and a conversation. But let's begin by saying just a few words about The Banquet, a collection that opens a door into a world where philosophy, poetry, and the cinema of memory meet. It is a book haunted by Dante, illuminated by Wittgenstein, and alive with the energy of the modern city. In these poems, Stav Poleg reimagines the convivio, Dante's unfinished banquet of knowledge, as a living dialogue between exile and belonging, between the possibilities of language, the act of writing, the passage of time, and the elasticity of space. The poems move fluidly between Florence and Paris, London and Cambridge, between the ancient and the digital, the sacred and the cinematic. Here, the city becomes a stage where grief and thought collide, where words are both refuge and weapon. Through the ghosts of Dante, Aristotle, and Tom Stoppard's Arcadia, Poleg invites us to sit at her table and join a feast of questions. What does it mean to know, to love in exile, to write in the language of everyday life? In one of the collection's most striking lines, she writes, "Anger, like language, will survive exile and earthquake." And indeed, The Banquet feels like an act of survival through speech, a reconstruction of self and city through the sheer persistence of words. It is a book about how knowledge and beauty can coexist with loss, about how the vernacular, the language of our lives, can become a space for revelation. Poleg's voice is erudite and electric, playful and devastating. Her poems pulse with cinematic imagery, rain becomes memory, cities turn into film, philosophy dissolves into weather. They speak from that charged space between intellect and feeling, theatre and theology, where thought itself becomes lyrical. The banquet is not merely read, it is experienced, as though one were walking through a storm of language, gathering fragments of beauty and pain. So before we start the reading, let me just say a few words about Stav. Stav is one of the most compelling poetic voices to emerge in recent years. Her second collection, The Banquet, has already been shortlisted for the Pen Heaney Prize, recognizing outstanding poetry focusing on social engagement. Susie Fay, writing in the Financial Times, has described the book as exhilarating, humorous, and not a little exhausting. Her debut collection, The City, published in 2022, was chosen by the Financial Times as one of the best summer books and shortlisted for the Seamus Heaney Prize for First Collection. Her poems have appeared in The New Yorker, Kenyon Review, Poetry London, PN Review, and The Poetry Review, among others. Stav moves effortlessly between languages, histories, and art forms. Her graphic novel installation, Dear Penelope, Variations on an August Morning, created with artist Laura Grisani, was acquired by the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. Her theatre work has been read at the Travers Theatre in Edinburgh, at London's Shunt Vault, and most recently at Kettle's Yard in Cambridge. She also teaches for the Poetry School and serves on the editorial board of Magma Poetry. But beyond her achievements, Stav Poleg is a writer of luminous curiosity, a poet who makes philosophy feel urgent, finds intimacy in abstraction, and treats the page as both canvas and stage. Her work asks us to see poetry not as escape, but as an engagement, a way of thinking, remembering and staying human. Tonight, we gather around the banquet not only to discuss a book, but to share in the feast it offers, of ideas, of language, of feeling. It gives me great pleasure in introducing and welcoming Stav Poleg, who will read from her collection.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Leo, for such a wonderful introduction. So I think I'll start reading my poems from the collection, and then we'll talk a bit about it afterwards. So here is the Banquet, and the book is divided into three separate parts. And I'm going to read a poem and a couple of poems from each section. So I'll start with the first poem, which is called Memory and Geography. And this is really a poem about time, but more specifically, it's a poem about the way I fail to grasp the concept of time. I feel that the older I get, the less I understand how time works conceptually and practically. It continues to be something I completely fail to understand. So I'm trying to understand it in my poetry. So I'll start with my first poem, Memory and Geography. Just waiting to see it on the screen. Okay. So Memory and Geography. There's a point at the edge of the field in a book I'm reading where a river I thought was missing turns into a film. A case of absence flowering action. A yellow bicycle on a metallic blue bridge, something like this. A bluish pink feather, the unsettled green in a silver dark sea. And in a different country, I mean chapter, the irregularity of autumn fields, the beauty of snow or of things when repeated. Maybe there's an algorithm creating a sunset, each page a split second later, a lake getting fuller and fuller, a room I'm trying to fit myself in. Surely there's an argument to be made against sunsets, how inadequate they are, how assured and self-indulgent, a recurring intervention in the memory of streets. Consider the rain as two opposite lands, two possible soundtracks for a sleepless long week. The principle of uncertainty, the certitude of clarity, something in between. Outside, the city is rising in circular movements like a fast-flying machine. You see, there's a thing I never understand. It's only when I'm running that time seems to happen at the right pace. Could you help with that? The city is moving. The river, the building, cyclists, junctions, newspapers, lampposts, some bridges, train stations, trees. Today, for example, it's snowing. A film crew is shooting a scene at the end of the street. It must be the seaside midsummer. A girl with heavy sunglasses holding onto a blue parasol as if it were a quick helium balloon. On the news, a storm is given a name. The sea is hysterical, the sky pulsing cerulean and pink like a fist. I know what you'd say. We are part of this scenery, no matter how irrational the weather is. There's so much noise, but the music is real. There are so many songs. How beautiful the sky tonight. How frightening and real. We could almost turn it into a film. The past as a mathematical object, would you agree? A system of clear borders, patterns, and doors that keep sliding forwards and backwards towards the long list of credits and names at the end of a film, the edge of a field. In a book I'm reading, where a river I thought missing turns into a bicycle wheel, a yellow feather, a scene in the snow, in the height of summer, just when the camera moves in. Somewhere a girl wrestles with an upturned umbrella, as if it were a rebelling idea, or the unstable heart of an open-air thought. Somewhere it's always snowing and always midsummer. I don't know how it works. The sunsets go backwards and forwards like unsettled clocks. As for the irregularity of buildings, streets, rivers, as for the nights burning their full-hearted bridges, how they glow and withdraw into the next movement of words. Maybe there's an algorithm that could measure the distance between absence and action, the precarious point when the night turns into a spiraling road, the moon beaming disorder like a heady cocktail, the news naming more stories, more cities and storms, and far off on an unlikely cliff or a snowy mountain overlooking the nest of a silver moon lake, the city, protective and real, an exaltation of words. Is this how a story begins, with the inconclusiveness of loss? There's a country I took for a landscape I wanted to restructure and change, at least in a film. A story I wanted to breathe from the start. Call it memory, call it geography, call it the vast landscape of childhood or night, a thing disappearing, a country turning into a map. So the next poem that I'll be reading is from the third part of the collection. We'll go back to the middle part, to the second part soon, but we are jumping now to the third part. And the third section of the collection is called Un amour désespéré, and there are quite a few poems after Rimbaud, who's been a major source of inspiration for me in the last couple of years. Almost every time when I read Rimbaud's work, I feel this urge to respond, this urge to experiment with his words. And what I really enjoy is taking parts of his sentences and experiment with them in my poem with my English, especially because I find French and English so similar. It feels like a great experiment to work with these two languages together. So I chose short poems. There are quite a few much longer poems after Rimbaud in the collection, but I chose a short sonnet, a rare short poem from this collection to read. So this is Un amour désespéré. An evening like this, to carry Rimbaud's ville in my palms, my dear, unreliable, beating city and sky, my emblem of night. La morale et la langue sont réduites à leur plus simple expression, enfin. Great waves will be crashing on the dark sapphire shore of this city at night. New furies will blossom and open like blue wounds in the cold, fractured shadow of stars. Notre ombre de bois, notre nuit d'été, a revelation that it was possible to love like this, even here, even in this nightfall traversed by strangers. Ces millions de gens qui n'ont pas besoin de se connaître, to love like this, to be so desperate, to watch the specters breathing smoke into the streets preoccupied with crime and death, et tout mon cœur, and care so much, care so desperately for this place. So next poem, we are going now back to the second part of the book, to the middle part of the book. So as I said, there are 3 sections in the book, and the middle part of the book, to me, it feels like the heart of the book, but it's an aching heart. There are not a lot, but quite a few painful poems in that middle part of the collection. It's called Autumn, the middle part. And one of the consequences is that there are very few poems that I can read aloud from that part, because some poems from the middle part of the collection are simply too difficult for me to read aloud. So the poem that I chose to read from that part is the last poem in the second part, and it's a poem that I wrote after Wittgenstein, after a section from the Philosophical Investigation, which is another book that I keep finding inspiration in. I always feel that when I open the Philosophical Investigation, it feels to me like a poetry manual, like with some poetry prompts to respond to. And this poem explores two two states of minds, two rooms. One room that contains pain and another room that contains piano tuning. So not really creativity, but the possibility of creativity, the possibility of sound, of something. And I think it is a poem that explores this movement between two states of mind, this movement between two rooms. And it was important for me to put this poem at the end of the second section because there is some kind of optimism about it, about the possibility of moving from a room that contains pain to a room that contains creativity. So this is the pain or the piano tuning. After Wittgenstein, Philosophical Investigations. 1. Someone is playing in the next room. In the distance, a road leading towards a lake under a higher wire moon. A perilous sky, a form of knowledge. To run along the river and break into tears. Yes, I can carry a world like a small creature of night. I can measure out speed against gestures of sound, train memory into a stop-motion device, build a room as a flight-capable machine. The air new and attentive to light, the sky made of irresolute star holding onto the moon's soaring fields, a form of knowledge, a new blue emerging intact, wide open, empirical and dark. Yes, in fact, imagine that you were in pain and were simultaneously hearing a piano being tuned in the next room. 2. Someone is playing in the next room, a new sky emerging intact, an exterior with streetlight and higher wire night, a form of knowledge, a sketch of two chambers in the upper blue dark, two moving images, two mountains breaking apart, two sunsets testing out rivers flowing towards the impulse of light. Imagine that you were in pain and simultaneously two cities emerge out of the water, ready for flight. Yes, I can carry a word like a small creature of sound, train memory into a light-proof device, draw landscapes out of water, more water and high-ceilinged clouds, a wave of knowledge or a wave of sorrow, a form of holding onto the dark, a point of living, or a way of shutting one's eyes which might be called looking into oneself. 3. A wave of sorrow, a word for studying, soaring into the dark, a new moon emerging in flight, a light storing machine. To run along the river, yes, I can hold onto a tear like a small creature of glass. I have done this all year. There are always two chambers in the upper blue dark, two pianos, two opposite rivers, two moons battling night, a force of knowledge, or a form of holding onto a sound. Someone is playing in the next room, an exterior with thunder and high ceiling dark, a form of looking into oneself, which might be called living or being attentive to the small ripples of night. What does this meaning, the pain or the piano tuning, consist in? What does a sigh flowing towards a sound? A wave of sorrow, or a word for longing, a field of attention drawing in light, something like light. And the next poem that I'll read is, we are back to the first part of the book. And this is a long poem after Dante's Convivio. Dante has been, or is the main influence of this book. I wrote several poems in response to Dante, and in particular to the Convivio, which I just find the most beautiful book about language and what we can do with language. And the Citadel of the Mind felt like a sort of a breakthrough poem. I remember when I was writing it, I felt like, oh, I'm doing something new. And this is quite rare when it happens, when you feel you do something new that you haven't done before. And it happened to me when I wrote The Citadel of the Mind. I felt like something new is happening in the way I write poems. So I feel quite attached to this poem because of that. So that's The Citadel of the Mind. First, you were an idea, a blue satellite orbiting a distant dark moon. Then you were a feather, the light distance it takes for beauty to form into something like finding the ground. It didn't happen without warning. The morning glowed like a feverish neon sign, an indication of clemency, I thought. The sky turned sapphire and dark like new foreign fire, a transposition from fear to loss. How wrong I was. How wrong was the weather, raining and raining without pause. I've always thought there was one primary source, not light or fire, but a small movement from sound into a word. The leaping fish was glowing from blue to bright turquoise when moving upstream. Or was it a song I was trying to catch? A foreign soundscape floating above the wide open highway when heading back home. First you were an idea, then an idea with wings, the purpose of flying or shifting the weight between travel and dream. Today I'm reading that the Vita Nova tells of dream visions and feverish hallucinations. It's late afternoon, the shortest day of the year. There are so many ways to lock oneself out of a castle, out of a world that threatens to destabilize a sentence, a faraway kingdom, the heart of a scene. Love, and the trembling of light when it reaches the water. Love like a highway, a misapprehension of speed. First you were stretching your arms, testing the wingspan of grief. It was not theoretical. You've known for too long how it feels. Knowledge and grief, the strange forces of water when they reach a new land. No, it's not that. Knowledge and grief, a theater scene carrying the weight of an unpronounced word. No, not quite what I mean. First you turned loss into a symbol, a primary myth. Then you found dreaming, the sounds taking flight in a faraway street. That you carried a sign like a country, that you weren't able to let go. Was that grief? The empiricist insists on realism. Dreams may come later. Dreams are the function of a visual mind. Dreams are echoes and interpretations. There's order, sure, there's order even in chaos theory, patterns, equations, the long calculations of matter as time. The historian considers primary sources as if they were numbers, not words. The poet is a pragmatist, making something out of the strange promise of nothing. Words are important, but not that important. First you were an idea, then a dark river, an arrow, a field fractured with lights. The philosopher seeks the truth. Truth, the poet thinks, how unusual and noble, how responsible and full of trust. The poet is a pragmatist. She prefers to play. Play, like sleep or love, is the most serious thing, the poet claims. Sure, the physicist says, before heading towards the river that cuts through opposite notion of time, whatever you say. In the Convivio, in the battle of knowledge versus love, Lady Philosophy wins hands down. But Dante tells us that Beatrice is still there, still walking around, still holding the citadel of my mind, the citadel of the mind, like a chamber of flashing blue light, is struck with new fire, lightning, the fierce temper of rain. Time has passed, but the mind does not do time. The mind refuses time as a gift made of distance and light. The physicist understands time in relation to space and gravity. Time is the fourth dimension in a physical, non-metaphorical sense. There is no such thing as space, but space-time. The heart is constructed of 4 chambers, the poet tries. The poet studies time like a theater scene, the fourth wall like a curtain of time between language and play. On the stage, time can be anything, a theater prop, an hourglass full of running blue sand. The actor takes the small hourglass before tossing it towards the ceiling again and again. Time like a target moving, time like a dark implication, a realization of heat. The actor picks up the broken, uneven fragments of glass from the sand-covered floor. The poet goes out of the theater, takes the first bus and starts running in words. Reading physics is like drinking 10 cups of espresso in 1 hour, the poet contemplates. My mind is high on physics. My heart is flying on so much caffeine. Time, like a want or a miscalculation. Is that it? In the convivio, letting Beatrice go is turning her into a leading idea, the sketch of a castle before building a castle. Does it work? Well, in the Purgatorio, Beatrice will come back less as an idea, more as an undefeatable force. First you were a satellite, then a dark forest, a fortress of words. You turned love into knowledge, darkness into a wrestling ring, the audacity of language when it gathers more speed. Yes, I know, I must accept. Not everything is about loss. Not all philosophy was forced to be written out of exile, the deep soundscape of grief. Not every word was invented due to the loss of another. Okay, sure, but most did. The poet is circling and circling a word like a feverish hawk. Time, a dark arrow with wings. No, it's not that. Time, an invisible wall between language and play. Well, time, like love or sleep, destabilizing a scene. No, still not quite what I'm trying to say. Time, like losing someone, losing brilliantly, exceptionally, losing mathematically, theatrically, losing with all chambers of hearts and not losing them at all, not losing one bit. Is that right? There's the thing Einstein wrote in the letter to the sister of his best friend. Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That signifies nothing. For those of us who believe in physics, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Yes, the poet says, count me in. I'm a believer in physics. That's what I meant when I said play. First you were an idea, a flying formation of words, then an admission. Time, no, I do not understand how it works. The poet is a pragmatist. In Paradiso 30, Beatrice will give Dante a departing message full of sadness and play. Luce intellettual, piena d'amore. Maybe that's why it was always about the citadel of the mind, not the chambers of heart. The mind, the mind has to work so much harder when confronted with loss. The mind must be pragmatic, construct a fortress, lose itself in theater, physics, anything to accommodate the heart's erratic notes. First you were an idea, then an idea with wings. It didn't work. Then you became a citadel, a strange castle to walk around or throw your heart in. The heart has 4 chambers, the poet thinks. Why is that so exciting? Like the 4 dimensions, the 4 directions, the 4th trembling wall. The poet is a moralist. How on earth has this happened? Well, words are important, but not that important. The poet believes in the material reality of right and wrong. First you were an idea, a gift of belonging, the distance it takes to fall into form, but then something happened, something so dark you were not able to utter or carry with words. A moralist, the poet, will come to the conclusion that knowledge has little to do with ethics and everything to do with loss. Grief like a city expanding, grief like the 4 highways of a heart. The mind is fearless. It will do anything, build a citadel, move stars across a map, construct new forests of lights and dark rivers, the mathematics of space and time, whatever it takes to carry what's left from one's language or childhood, whatever it takes to carry what's left from the heart. Oh, that was a very long poem.
Thank you so much, Stav. That was absolutely wonderful. So mesmerizing. Listening to you reading the poems is it's really, really wonderful. As someone, I think Lisa was saying in the chat that it's almost like a dream world, sort of in words. So absolutely incredible, fantastic. So Stav, as you already know, I wrote so many questions. I have so many questions for you. So we let's start this conversation with some of the questions, and maybe we continue with some questions from the audience. So my first question has to do with some of the inspirations that you mentioned, Dante, Rimbaud, and Wittgenstein. But let's focus a little bit more on Dante's Convivio. You mentioned just recently that you found that the Convivio is the most beautiful book about language, and I wanted to know, why you decided to read Dante in that way and Dante's Convivio in that way, and also can you tell us a little bit more about the your own Banquet?
So yeah, probably it's worth mentioning to say that the Banquet, which is the title poem, it's a long poem, which I would not read today, but it's a long poem and it's written directly in response to the Convivio. And the Convivio means the banquet in Italian. Yeah, it's a book that it's a very big book, a bit like encyclopedia, but the first book is a defense of Dante has to explain why he writes it in English, why he writes the commentary to the poems not in English, in Italian, why he writes the commentary to the poems in Italian, in the vernacular Florentine. And that defense of language, why he writes it and not in Latin. And it's just completely beautiful. So there are many reasons. He mentions that if he writes in Italian, it means in the vernacular, it means that more people can read, not only people who are scholars, not only people who had the fortune to go and study, to be at university and study. Everyone can read it. And then he also talk about how intimate this language is. It's the language that you talk with your parents. It's the language that even if you learn Latin with the vernacular. So it's a language that is a tool for learning other things. And it's so beautiful. And then he also talks about the fact the bit that moved me most was the way he talks quite a lot about how it's a language that carries change because it's a language that changes, because we speak, I mean, we use the vernacular every day, and it's a language that carries change. And I just basically fell in love with this book, especially with the first chapter. And really, I just wanted to study it and to learn it and I wrote a long notebook with a lot of notes and my way to study it, as is the way of studying a lot of other things, is to write poems in response and really exploring it. But I have to say that I feel that I haven't finished studying it. It's an incredible book and such a complex book. So it's almost
Mm,
feel to me it's only the beginning. I need to go
mm.
back to this book and study it more.
And in relation to that, I remember reading Dante's La Divina Commedia, for instance, and I read Dante in Spanish because when I tried to read it in English, there was this distance. I felt like with Spanish, in my case, because it's similar to or closer to Italian, that I
Yeah.
was somehow closer to Dante, in some ways. And I'm sure that you read it. Did you read it in English, Stav?
I read it both. I mean, with the Convivio, I have the dual. Maybe I can show the book. I have it here, and I keep looking at it. So maybe I can show this most beautiful book. It's like it's my Bible, and you see
Mm,
it's huge. I mean, you
mm,
can spend your entire life just reading and rereading it. Um, yeah, so it's a dual language. So I read it both in Italian and in English. But the Italian is so close. It's the vernacular Florentine, but it is so close to modern Italian. You can understand it. I mean, if you know Italian, you can read Dante and understand
mm,
quite a lot. So yeah, I've been reading
mm.
in both
In
languages.
both languages, fantastic. Now that you read The Citadel of the Mind, one of my questions is that in one of the lines in that poem, you said, the poet is a pragmatist. She prefers to play. And my question is play a form of resistance for you, a survival mechanism, sort of a poetics? We talk a little bit about playing when writing poetry. We led workshops together, and you mentioned this to some of the participants. And I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by this approach of when you write, you sort of you play, you are in that kind of state of mind, and I want to to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think I consider a play a very serious thing. I think it's even more important to remind yourself when you write, and I often say to the student, remind yourself that you are playing, even if you write about something really difficult and really heartbreaking. You are still playing. Essentially, you're experimenting with language. So for me, this is a form of play, and I find it really useful to remind it for myself when if I write something on a very painful topic, which often is the case. If I remind myself that I'm also playing, I just have to remind myself, oh, how fortunate I am. I'm just sitting here and playing with words. I'm just sitting. This is where, this is the place where I can find new things, new
Mm,
ideas, new concepts. This is where I can be a bit more courageous in my thinking. So play
mm,
for me, it's a very serious thing.
mm, mhm,
It's a fun. It's almost like you have to play when you write, especially about difficult
mm,
stuff, because then
mm,
other things can happen in the process.
mm. And there's also this idea of maybe playing music because every time I read, your poems, I read the book many times, and the more I read your book, the more I find the music that is so musical. Maybe it's because of the repetitions, maybe because of the repeated words, or maybe repeated lines, and this idea of rhythm, and maybe play, and there are, the piano tuning, there are music is very much almost like the score of a film, or and I find that there's that kind of sense as well, the kind of playing music, that idea that you kind of that you're listening to these sounds, and you go with them sometimes, and it's really exciting. It gets abstract in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel the rhythm of a poem is incredibly important for me, but mainly because when I write poem, I often try to write a movement that never stops. It's the biggest challenge, especially in long poems, but also in short poems, how to create a movement. I really think like that, in like you create a creature of movement. It has
Mm,
to flow, it has to move all the time until the end, but even at the end, it's still, even when you leave it, it still need to be able to move. So I think in that sense, it has to have some kind of musicality to it, in terms of something has to kind of a force of movement, a force of sounds and rhythm and repetition perhaps as well because of that.
mm, mm. I mean, you mentioned play, but also studying poetry, and I wonder what you mean by study in poetry. There is this recurring line about wanting to know everything, and my question would be, does poetry replace knowledge or expand it somehow?
I think for me, poetry writing really is a way of studying. I have this feeling most of the time that I need to study, like urge to study. It comes from a place when I feel I don't know enough. I need to know this and this and this. And then even when I know something, I feel I need to reread it and I want to learn whether it's a topic or a language. And poetry for me is a great tool to do that, to study, to discover new things. And when I write a poem, when I work on my poems, it's always, I always want to discover something new, but crucially, I want this particular thing not to be only about myself. It has to be something like I feel I need to be kind of aware that it has to be something out of the self as well, because if I'm not careful, I will end up writing about myself forever. I mean, like everyone, because we keep changing and we keep encountering new experiences. You can just write about what happens in your daily life, and that will be amazing enough. But I feel I need to force myself to study other things as well, because this is
Mm.
where, when if we talk about a sense of play, this is where I feel I can really play. I can really,
Mm, mm.
um,
I can really relate to you, Stav, from my own collection in the sonnets, this idea of like going out and maybe reading
yeah,
Darwin or all the other sources. And it really resonated with when I was reading your book, that way, that thing that you said, that you were urged to respond to those texts. And I really feel, closeness to that idea, because it's by this close reading that you want to respond to an immediate
yeah,
response, and that's kind of, yeah, and it's quite exciting. It's almost like you're in conversation with those poets, or explorers in my case, or archivists, or
yeah.
historians, or yeah.
Yes, and in your book there is again this kind of conversation between, there are very personal sonnets, and then there are sonnets that are in conversation with explorers and with the past and with history. So it's this combination that makes it so
Mhm.
powerful. Mm.
Mm. Um, Stav, I wanted to ask you about the cinematic aspect of many of your poems. The idea of full of movements and jump cuts and dissolves and mise en scènes, and I wonder, how do you feel like film and theatre shape your writing practice, and in what ways?
I think when I write poems, I often feel like a frustrated filmmaker or a frustrated theater maker. It's really kind of, that's how I feel. I feel like, oh, I wish I could create a film about this. And then I think, okay, actually, I can do it with words. I can actually do that. So it's a lot of time it comes from that place. I'm not really frustrated filmmaker. I love working with language, but I have this feeling that I want to create a scene, and it connects to the sense of movement, what I said before, because visual images are incredibly important for me in poetry, but what is really important is the movement between visual image to the next, how one visual image can transform into another in the following stanza. And this transformation, this movement can create cinematic effects when one image turns into another, and we can do it in poetry.
Mm. And it's really interesting in your poetry that I never feel that it's a direct line from A to B. I mean, it's always this. I mean, the movement is it's not direct. And it's lovely what you create. It really transforms. Every stanza moves elsewhere. Kind of it's you don't know where you're gonna go. It's really that kind of sense of and the unexpected, that it
Mm,
keeps you like not knowing what's going to happen next. And that line break, Laura Scott was mentioning in the chat that she's fascinated by how you do enjambments, how you break the line, and then suddenly you're somewhere else. And
mm,
that's it's playful, and also like it creates this sense of the unexpected, which is lovely.
yeah. Mm.
um, so, Steph, speaking of that, we have some questions from the audience, and so I can read some. So Lisa Kelly is she says she's interested in the long form, and how you embrace this in your second collection. And she asks, is it something that you do intuitively or consciously, and how does it serve the content of the poem, and what effects it achieves?
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting because I felt I had to fight this long form for a long time, and then I thought, okay, I'll just write these long poems. They need to be long because actually I wanted to be really practical. So often I thought, okay, I need to write 6 short poems and just send them off to a magazine for publication. And then, because practically it's better to write short poems in terms of publication in magazines. It's a bit kind of from a practical point of view. So I tried most of the long poems in this book. I wanted them to be short,
Mm,
and they just resisted. I had to continue and continue. And then at one point I thought, maybe this is my new way of writing. And
mm,
maybe I just need to embrace it and enjoy writing long form. And now I'm thinking, the more I'm thinking of it, I realize that for me it is a way to explore maybe philosophical concepts. It's a form for contemplation. You can't really do
mm,
that in a very short poem. You can create really strong images, really strong scenes in short poems, but if you
mm,
want to explore ideas, I think long poems, at least for me,
mm.
um, are more useful.
Fascinating. We've got another question from Michael Schmidt, and he asks, "Isn't playing a way of playing away from the self? It is a way of escaping the merely subjective into something that has a mind of its own. You have a dialogue with it because it is other." Um, so I wonder if that's the case.
Yes, I think that's probably true. I think maybe that's why it's so fun to play and to imagine that you have a different voice, or sometimes I can write poem with great confidence, with big
Mm,
statements. So in a way, I'm
mhm,
taking it out of myself, out of
mm,
the self. I
mm,
think, yeah, that's definitely part of that, to imagine that you're in a different scene or in a different state of mind, or yeah.
Mm,
or also different languages. I think that's also
mm,
part of why I enjoy so much experimenting with French and Italian, and of
yeah.
course in English. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me a little bit of what you were saying about my collection, this idea of like going from the personal into another realm, like sort of the realm of the historical archive, for instance, and kind of perhaps in the personal responding to, let's say, a photograph or a memory of your childhood, a memory of the past, and responding to that as if it
Yeah.
was a book or if it was a photograph or an image, and then responding to something completely different, taking that journey away from the
Yes.
purely personal I mean still personal in some ways, because I even feel like when reading some of the poems, inspired by Dante or Rimbaud, that it's a conversation, but there's a lot of your own sort of self in those poems as well.
Yeah. Yeah. They bring some kind of new voice out of me, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. We have Laura Scott asking about enjambments. She's fascinated by the way that you break a line, and she says that she finds it really, that you've done beautifully. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about enjambment and line breaks in your poems.
Yeah, I feel line breaks are incredibly important for me. I think I see the poem as sculpture and as a sculpture that you can go around. So line breaks are the way to go around those sculpture and also the way to create movement, really. And because I'm so interested in movement, that's why line breaks are so important for me, because at the end of the line has to lead you to the following line. I can't I rarely put a full stop at the end of a line. It's very difficult for me to do that because it means that there is a pause. So if I put a full stop, it would be in the middle of a line, because line breaks for me, yeah, this is where the poem moves. This is how I
Mm,
create movement.
mm. Brilliant. So we've got another question from Lucy Alsop, and she asks, Stav, can you say more about your arcs of choosing in the pragmatic moment of meaning words? Because as you say, the poet is a moralist.
Once again, can you say
Yeah,
can you
Stav, can you say more about your acts of choosing in the pragmatic moment of meaning words? Because as you say, the poet is a moralist.
Right, I'm not entirely sure what Lucy means by it, although I'm
Mm,
sure it is. I mean, knowing Lucy also, I'm sure it's a very deep question. The poet is a moralist. In that particular poem, it was important for me to add it because this was a bit of a change. The poem starts from the poet that kind of thinking, oh, truth, what an interesting idea. The poet just want to play. And I wanted
mm,
to kind of move towards a more confident or a more absolute way of looking at
mhm,
things of about right and wrong. So in a way, maybe the poet is a bit more grown up at the end of
mm.
the end of that specific poem. I don't know if that answers Lucy's question. Uh,
Um, we have another question by Emmy Hart, and she asks, "What's next?"
What's next? Yeah, I keep thinking of it. I think next would have to be going back to Dante at some point, because I just miss reading the Convivio and the Divine Comedy. So it feels like I need to go back. And also Aristotle, uh,
Mm,
ethics, and soul, the treatise about the soul. So these are things that I keep thinking of.
fantastic. So, we have another question from Romy Smith, and she asks, "You are a poet who is multilingual and working across and within languages, both in the body of your poems and in the intertextual references in those poems. Does a poem tell you the language in which it needs to exist? And do you need to dream in a particular language in order to decide to write within it?"
Very
Mm,
interesting. I think my main language of creative practice is definitely English, and this feels like an incredible language because it feels completely infinite. I feel that I still learning words almost every day. If I see an email from a certain person, I would know, oh, I need to Google some of the words,
mm,
the high language. So I keep learning English, and and I enjoy it so much. when I use French and Italian in the poems, usually I try to be conscious that the words that I choose are ones that people who don't speak French and Italian can still understand. So if I use, for example, amore in a poem from Italian, I can kind of trust that people will get what it is, even if they don't speak Italian. So I'm quite conscious about that. And you can do it with Italian and French because there are so many words that are similar to English, so you can actually do that. And it's part of what I enjoy to see similarities between these languages.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in the past, Stav, because both of us are multilingual poets and we write in English. In my case, I write in Spanish as well. And it's interesting, kind of that movement from the
Yeah.
mother tongue into kind of the acquired language, or one writes very differently. In my case, in both languages,
Mm.
it's not like a translation from Spanish into English. It's a different
Yeah.
thing. And I guess in your case it's the same, although you only write in poetry in English stuff.
I only write in English, and
Yeah.
what Romy Smith asked about dreams, I don't know. I think my dreams are mainly visual. I think that's why visual images are so important. It's less about language, like, I suppose, in my dreams. It's more visual images, and then my challenge is how to move those visual images into poetry in the most precise way.
Mm, wonderful. So, Steph, would you like to read a final poem for us?
Yes, definitely. So I'll read the final poem. I'll wait for it to be shown. So this is a poem. I'll just say the story about it because it's quite amusing, I think. So I completed the manuscript and I was very happy and I felt, oh, what a great achievement. And I sent it to Carcanet and that was that. And then 2 days after I submitted the manuscript, I felt this pain. It was almost like grief. I thought, oh, I haven't finished writing. I have a lot of things that I want to say, especially about Dante, Convivio. There are a lot of ideas. I have a booklet, notebook, full of ideas and things I have to write. So I wrote this poem really, really quickly. It's one of my quickest poems. It took me, I think, 5 days to complete it, which is incredibly quick for me. Usually I write poems, it takes months, not even weeks, months. So this is an incredibly fast poem, even though, of course, it's based on a lot of contemplations that I've done for months before. And then, so I finished this poem and then sent it to John and said, kind of, stop press, can you please also add this poem? And that's how the poem ended in this collection as well. So it's a poem, again, in response to the Convivio, and this is a poem about the writer as a student of language, the writer as a scholar of language. And I think in a sense that's what poets are. As soon as we start writing, what we do is experimenting with language. So we are all kind of students or scholars of language. That's the material we work with. So I'll read it now. A wandering. La scrittura è stella piena di luce. Dante Convivio. The author holds onto a word like testing the rapture of sound, something like light breaking out of a disquieted star, a wandering. The soul reveals itself in the mouth almost like color behind glass. Maybe some books are not meant to be put aside. Maybe once opened, they've broken something within the reader, the one holding the words close in her palms. A deep, singular cut emitting sharp light, a heightened pain, a road ascending towards the fracture of night, the closest one's been to an understanding. Something like this, a point of respite. I'm back to Dante, studying the fissure and impulse of sound. And what is laughter if not a coruscation of the soul's delight, a light appearing outside in accordance with what is within? Authority, the declaration of an author, atto d'autore, an action of writing, a word taking shape like a wave of attention, a wandering sound. There are two words in Italian for knowing, two words chasing each other, moving apart. Sapere, to know. Conoscere, to know deeply, to know someone, to recognize. I think there's something here to do with longing, an action of running backward and forward, a wave breaking out of a disquieted star. True study, Dante says, is the application of the mind to the thing it is in love with. The author looks after a word until it grows into a creature of light. The application of the mind, the thing it is in love with. Some books, once soaring out of the window and into the night, will not be restrained, will not be brought back to the ground. In Latin, studium has two meanings, two rebelling mind, study, sure, but also excitement, enthusiasm. La scrittura è stella piena di luce. Writing is a star full of light, a star full of fracture. The author carries a word like a chest heavy with flight. The reader enters the room of a book, holding on to the night as if it were made of dark, wandering letters. An application, a sort of attention to sound, a star full of light which manifests the field of knowledge, a wave of delight. You are one thing, reader, and then you are another, a holder of light.
Wow. Thank you so much, Stav, for that really beautiful reading and for a wonderful evening, for sharing your poems and your imagination, your ideas. And thank you to everyone here for joining us tonight, for listening so attentively and for being part of this shared space of poetry and conversation. The Banquet reminds us how language can still be a kind of home, how poetry can hold both clarity and mystery, intellect and emotion, exile and belonging. If you haven't yet got a copy of The Banquet, I really encourage you to do so, and perhaps even to get one for a friend who loves language, philosophy, or just the beauty of a well-crafted poem. It's a book that deepens with each reading, and I read it so many times, I'm absolutely in love with it. So, Stav, thank you so much for your beautiful work and for your generosity this evening. And to all of you, thank you for being here and for keeping poetry alive. So have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you all soon.
And thank you so much, Leo, for being such a wonderful host.